Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Scott Seltz, publisher of Engineering News Record, and welcome to this discussion about 4 critical New Year resolutions that AEC firms should consider for 2023, which is brought to you by Bentley Systems. The new year is generally a time for looking back on how things have gone in our lives, assessing what's going well, what we want to change. We've just weathered 3 years of uncertainty with the pandemic, incredible transformation in labor markets of all kinds, political turmoil, war, and inflation. 2023 promises to be more of the same uncertainty, driven largely by continued conflicts, looming recession, and economic volatility. Today, I'm talking with Claire Rutkowski, Senior Vice President and CIO Champion at Bentley Systems. During her more than 20-year career in the AEC industry, Claire's received numerous awards, most recently the top 80 CIOs you should know in 2020, and the top 10 most inspiring women leaders in 2022. Claire uses her experience to advocate for CXOs at engineering firms and to serve as a bridge between Bentley and its engineering accounts. Welcome, Claire. Happy New Year, and it's great to talk with you again.
It's good to see you too, Scott.
So right off the bat, what's New Year's resolutions should AEC CEOs be making?
Well, if I was an AEC CEO, I'd be making 4 resolutions. The first one would be finding the balance between bottom line reductions and top line growth. There are a lot of economic concerns, and we are in a turbulent time. So I think threading that needle is really important for CEOs. But at the same time, I think they need to resist the urge to freeze all spending. It's easy to say, oh, let's hunker down. But it's really important to continue to develop or advance digital strategies. As an industry, things are changing so rapidly, and if a company just stops, they're going to fall behind. My third resolution would be to hire, right? Just like real estate is location, location, location. I think we're in the midst of a major talent shortage, and it's really important to continue to keep that funnel full and be as inclusive as possible in that hiring. And then the fourth resolution would be to make sure that you're fully tapping into your virtual teams, engaging with them and monitoring how they're doing.
Those are great resolutions. So let's delve into each one of those topics a little bit more. How can AEC CEOs find the right balance between bottom line reduction and top line growth?
Well, I think it's important to protect the operating margin. So obviously looking at some combination of reducing costs and increasing revenue is important, given that we're seeing turbulence and nobody has that crystal ball to look into the future. On the one hand, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. Backlog is up and really hardy. In some cases, companies are actually turning down work. But there's also pessimism, right, around a recession, around inflation. There's lots of layoffs. There's all kinds of things happening. But the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So it's important to place bets carefully. And that doesn't mean laying off people, right? An AEC survey in 2022, AEC Advisors, did a survey of CEOs and found that the average firm has about 15 months of backlog. That's a lot. And so that means we need all the people we can. But there's other ways to find efficiency. I think the first way is to shed what you don't need, right? So if you have real estate that you can get out of, that's definitely an option. If you have shelfware that is just sitting there, software that you don't use, then that's something to look at too. But there are other ways. Maximize what you have. Definitely use it to the fullest. And one of the ways that I would encourage AEC firms to look at that is implementing component-based design. Component-based design is something that most engineering firms are capable of doing right now with the tools that they already have, and it will massively increase their efficiency and throughput by leveraging the same component over and over again on multiple designs. And of course, in improving and streamlining business processes of all kinds. I mean, that's kind of bread and butter of finding efficiencies. But then we look at top line growth, right? How do we do that? Especially when our backlog is already full. I think we can reimagine some of the services being offered by looking at things like digital twins, remote inspections, and leveraging all the data that firms have now because of better tools, better ways of doing things. There's just so much data about designs, about as-built infrastructure that firms can leverage to create new revenue streams.
I hear what you're saying about narrowing down what you spend on, but as a business operator myself, let me play the devil's advocate. Wouldn't it just be easier to freeze all spending and decide that maybe 2023 is not the year for investing and going digital?
Yeah, that would be the easy answer. It would be a very risky answer, though, because I think that our industry is changing so rapidly. You know, we always used to be at the very bottom of the McKinsey study in 2015, and it's an outdated study above agriculture. Okay, we weren't last. But I think if that survey was to be done today, it would be dramatically different results. I think that the AEC industry, whether it's architecture, engineering, design, or construction, has rapidly advanced in terms of the way that we look at our infrastructure. We have no choice, right? In fact, that same AEC advisor survey I talked about earlier found that within 10 years, these were CEOs who were surveyed, 36% of their revenue is going to come directly from digital initiatives. That's a lot. And if you look at a generation, stretch it out a little bit, half of the revenue of AEC firms is going to come from digital initiatives. So if you take a year off, you risk falling further behind. It's very important to continue to press ahead. And that can be done in any number of ways. It could be drones, the use of drones for remote inspection, for capturing reality, however you want to do it. 2/3 of firms are already doing that. So if you're not doing that, you really need to start doing that. Proprietary analytics. We see about half of firms already investing there because there is so much data that you can mine for insights and then use those as revenue for your clients. Applying machine learning, we've already mentioned 3D and 4D surveying and modeling, construction monitoring, infrastructure digital twins are a big push, I think, not just for Bentley, but across the industry as a whole. IoT monitoring in the as-built world is very important. And let's face it, most of our assets are already out there. We just have to fix them, particularly here in North America. So IoT monitoring is very important, and doing asset resilience simulation. There are loads of ways to go digital. You just have to figure out where you want to put your chips. The most important thing is if you're not already going digital, start, because you're behind. And if you are going digital, don't take your foot off the gas because you'll regret it. It's the 2024 you will like you a lot better if you do these things in 2023.
All right, you convinced me. So labor shortages are one of the biggest issues facing AEC firms now, and you've suggested hiring and inclusivity as a resolution. How can firms do that when they're already facing challenges finding the right people?
Well, I think the first thing is being open to people not being in your backyard. And I think a lot of firms are doing this, but not everyone. And so I do think it's the pandemic, if it proved nothing else to us, it proved that our workforce can be productive and collaborative and get things done, even while not physically co-located in an office. So I think it's really important to remember that and not fall back to old habits of people having to be within a 30-mile proximity of an office so that they can go in every day. The workforce is different. I think people's priorities have changed and people want that flexibility. So I think being open to that helps a lot in terms of giving you more options. In terms of inclusivity, I think it's also really important to remember that men and women look at job descriptions differently. Now, I'm going to make what sounds like a sweeping generality here and a stereotype, and I don't mean it to be because it's based on research, lots of research. There's an author called Deborah Kolb who's written several different books and lots of articles about gender and its impact on negotiations, asking for promotions, and applying for jobs. And her research in the 20-teens is also backed up by more recent data from LinkedIn, as well as a 2021 study from Forbes. And they all found the same thing. So these are not my sweeping generalities. These are research based. And they find that in order to apply for a job, women tend to feel that they need to meet 100% of the criteria. 100%. Whereas men feel like, well, if it's 60%, I'm close enough. I'm going to apply anyway. I'll throw my hat in the ring and give it a shot. And I can say from personal experience, for me anyway, that's true. If it says a requirement on a job description, that means it's a requirement. That's like a box I have to tick before I'm ready to apply. Whereas men look at it differently and think it's a guideline. I'm kind of close enough. So I think for engineering firms to be more inclusive, they need to be aware of that. They need to think maybe about using the word preferred qualifications instead of requirements, because then it's more like, okay, it's preferred, but maybe I don't have to have all of it. We also need to be conscious of our recruiters. They don't do it on purpose, but recruiters don't help in the inclusivity area either. Recruiters tend in general, and again, this is based on LinkedIn research, they are 13% less likely to click on a women's profile. It's unconscious bias. It's something that we do and we don't realize that we do it. I'm sure that no one is doing it on purpose, but we have to be aware of that. So I think it's important that we take names off resumes wherever we can so that that unconscious bias isn't there. And that we use the word preferred qualifications instead of requirements. They're small changes, but they can make a big difference. I think the other thing is accept that heightened turnover is a thing, right? It's people don't join companies anymore and expect necessarily to be there for 10 or 20 years. There's more of a mindset of, well, I want to get the most varied experience that I can. People, just as I mentioned before, have different relationships to their jobs. And so it's important to just accept the fact that turnover is going to happen. We should try to obviously be inclusive and keep and retain as many qualified employees as we can. But if heightened turnover is a thing and it's here to stay, then let's make some effort to ensure that our onboarding is strong, it's efficient, we can get people up to speed quickly, whether they are in an office or in a more virtual setting. And once you have someone on board, make sure that you are creating an inclusive and acceptive environment so people feel comfortable to stay. And then there is one more tip around hiring, which actually comes from one of my friends, Linda Lannon with SWCA. We were talking about this whole talent shortage and what do we do? And she said, you know what? One of the things that I'm doing is when I find great talent, I'm hiring them. Whether I have an opening or not, I'm just hiring them. If I come across someone who seems like they have the right stuff, I'm getting them on board and I'm worrying about the position later, which I thought was a great tip because it kind of goes against the way that we think about things, but that's a good one too.
Yeah, thank you. That was very enlightening, and I'm going to make a note about that. You know, the pandemic has given rise to virtual teams. I mean, they existed before, but now it's commonplace. And for those firms that have virtual teams, how can they make the best use of them?
Well, as someone who has worked virtually to some degree or another for the past 20 years, not a new thing for me. I will say it's really important to treat virtual team members the same way that you treat team members in an office. I mean, let's think about the words that we use, right? Remote. That means you're like way far away somewhere else. It kind of implies a disconnection. So does virtual. I'm not real, but I am. I'm right here. I'm working, right? So we have to be careful about that. It's common parlance though, so that's okay. But the main thing is to treat people the same and to be really aware of something called proximity bias, which is something that most of us don't realize that we do. And when I did a little research into this, I actually found the results to be frankly shocking. And I don't use that word lightly. So proximity bias is the belief that people who are closer to us, who we can actually see working, are viewed more favorably. They're more likely to get promotions. They're more likely to get great assignments. And you would think in a post-pandemic world that would have gone away, but not so. Gartner did a study in February of 2022 on this topic, and Harvard Business Review recently also reported on a study done by the Society for Human Resource Management, which they did towards the end of last year. In 2021. The source data was a survey of more than 800 supervisors in 2021, so post-lockdown. And of the 800 supervisors surveyed, 67%, two-thirds, said that remote workers are more replaceable than on-site workers. That is amazing, mind-blowing number. That's shocking, right? And even worse, 42% admitted to forgetting about remote workers when assigning work. Like, how is that even possible in a post-pandemic world where we've all been on Zoom and Teams meetings for the last however many years? How do you forget about people? And most of the respondents felt that their on-site workers are more productive still, even now. So there's major problems with this proximity bias. First of all, it's just flat out wrong. Remote workers are generally about 15% more productive than on-site workers. I found during the pandemic, for my team in particular, productivity levels went up about 30%. That's my own personal experience of something I could measure. But generally speaking, it's about 15% because you don't have the drive-bys. And you could argue, well, those drive-bys and coffee cooler conversations and the serendipity of that is really important for innovation. But productivity-wise, people are more productive when they have the space to concentrate. From a diversity perspective, that proximity bias is also really problematic because what happens is people who are more likely to be marginalized or experience microaggressions in the office are more likely to want to stay out of the office. So in flexible working arrangements, they are more likely to choose to not come in. Okay, so let's play this out over a few years. If they don't come in and we have proximity bias in play, then they're less likely to be chosen for promotions. They're less likely to be selected for advancement. So the diversity problem that we have in our industry as a whole, again, generalization, it's not true in all companies, but it is true in a lot of companies. It just gets worse and worse, right? So that is a problem. The people that we want to most include are being marginalized. So we have to be very, very careful of that. And leaders and managers really need to be like hyper aware of this proximity bias and really make sure that they don't end up with the A team who's in an office and the B team who's located elsewhere. And there's lots of ways to do that, but it has to do with being purposeful. Being aware of it is number one, but number two is being purposeful, right? And that means understanding and empathizing and just making sure that you're a supportive leader regardless of where your team members are located, making sure that you create a sense of team that includes everyone. So having everyone in meetings, and I've even gone so far as if everyone's in the office except for one or two people, either having a laptop that has them in the room with everyone else with their screen, right? Or using conferencing systems that I think most of us have now, or having everyone go to their desks and do the call from their desks so that there's a level playing field. That's important. And making sure that you're really even with your one-on-one time. The same amount of one-on-one time for people who are not in an office as the person who's down the hall is really, really important. The other thing that's really important is providing objectives and measuring performance. Because if everybody has transparent objectives, then there's none of that, well, I wonder what they're working on. I can't see them. I don't know. So I don't know what that person does, right? But if everyone has published objectives that everyone else can see, it sort of takes away a little bit of that, what are they doing kind of thing, and makes it equal for everyone, which is the most important thing when you have geographically dispersed teams. And the last thing is make sure it's fun. Make sure, in the office, it's really easy to say, let's get some pizza for lunch today, right? Or let's do whatever. It's important to provide those engagements, the opportunities to have a chat virtually as well, whether it's having open coffee hour where people can just virtual water cooler, right? People could just come and sit down and chat, or doing fun things like take a picture from your desk and share it. Whatever your view is, let's look at your view.
Those are great recommendations. And I especially like the last one. I'm a great advocate of it has to be fun. You have to make it fun. Work is even better that way.
That's right. We spend more hours at work, sadly, than we do anywhere else in our lives, right? When you think of the number of hours that we spend and you subtract sleeping and everything else. So it has to be fun. Very important.
Claire, this has been a great conversation, and thank you for sharing your recommendations for AEC firms to have a more successful outcome this coming year.
Thank you, Scott. I enjoyed the conversation as well, and I hope everybody got something out of it.
I want to thank our viewers for joining us as well as our podcast sponsor, Bentley Systems. Be sure to share this podcast with your colleagues, as well as listen to other ENR podcasts, which you can find at enr.com/podcasts. Have a great day.